Hello guys, I hope you're all doing fantastic. Today we're going to solve May-June 2023 paper 1 variant 1 of 0455 IGCSE Economics. As you guys know, this is a multiple choice question. We've got 30 questions. We've got to choose from 4 different options. We'll select the best option. Now, before I begin this paper, I would like to remind all of you that we're offering live classes as well. And our classes will start from 1st of August for the May-June 2025 session. So for those of you who are going to appear for your exams in that particular session, they can register on our website for our live classes. So we can fully teach you all the concepts. And, these are just past paper solutions. Now, let's begin. What is the cause of scarcity in an economy? As you guys remember, the basic economic problem, we've discussed that concept before, right? Limited resources and unlimited ones. We're going to go with the first option. Now we look at the next question. What does a point on a production possibility curve for an economy represent? So when we talk about a PPC, a point on PPC means that we are achieving maximum potential. We are utilizing all our resources, right? So it's not that economy is falling. It's not that there's inefficient use of resources. Just a second. Yeah. Maximum output with the possible current technology. We're going to go with this option here. Okay. Next question. What is, just a second. Yeah. What is most likely to increase enterprise as a factor of production in an economy? Well, as you know, that the enterprise is one of the key factors of production. And what is going to increase enterprise? Does a decrease in government spending on education increase enterprise? Of course not. Entrepreneurs are very talented people and they're most likely educated too. A decrease in regulation on firms, well, yes, because if there's less regulation, then it gives, you could say, an incentive to a lot of young people to start their own businesses because regulations are more sort of obstacles for new business owners. So we're gonna go with option B over here. Next question. Which economic activity would be classified as macroeconomics? Households spend less on holidays abroad. So when we talk about macroeconomics, we're looking at economy as a whole and we're talking about government policy and its objectives. So income taxes increased by the government. So it's gonna be this option B because we're talking about government policy and government objectives, right? When we talk about government policy and government objectives, it's part of our macroeconomics. In your option A, we're discussing about household. It's one of the 3 different agents in an economy, right? Households or individuals, and firms and the government. When we're talking about government, we're talking about the government policies which will impact the economy as a whole, and it will be for the achievement of the government's macroeconomic objectives, right? One of those policies is your fiscal policy, which includes changes in the tax rates. It's option B here. Next question, question number 5. The diagram shows the effect of a decrease in the price on the demand for a product. So basically, when the price is falling, the quantity demand is increasing. What does this indicate? It's an extension in demand. This is basic. Okay. What is the correct formula to calculate price elasticity of supply? The percentage change in quantity supplied divided by percentage change in price. Again, this is just basic knowledge. Okay. What is most likely cause of a product having a price elasticity of demand greater than 1? What is the most likely cause of a product having a price elastic demand greater? That means it should, what is the cause of the PED being elastic? When it's greater than one, it means it's elastic. And that's usually the case when there's a close substitute. If it's a habit forming, it's inelastic. If it's a necessity, it's inelastic. If it's a small proportion of the consumer, it's inelastic. So all of these options are wrong. Moving on to the next question. For some illnesses, wearing a face mask has a benefit as it could prevent people from getting infected. Not all people are willing to wear face masks. Based on the statement above, why would there be an inefficient allocation of face masks in the free market? Well, the thing is, it has an externality, if you remember that, right? So consumers in a free market only consider private costs and benefits, and they do not consider the external costs and benefits. So if something has a positive externality, which means it is a greater social benefit than the private benefit, right? And since only private benefits are considered when making a decision, right, which affects your demand curve, right, or your supply curve if only private costs are taken into account, right? So since your externalities are ignored, it results in inefficient allocation of resources. So if something has social benefits that exceed its private benefits, as is the case here, it would be underconsumed because people wouldn't fully realize the benefit of it, and they wouldn't be willing to consume it in as much quantities as it should have been, right, for there to be allocative efficiency. So the thing is, consumers in free market only consider private costs and benefits, right? It's very important that you are familiar with these concepts, right? If you're not familiar, then maybe you don't understand a lot of this explanation. I mean, for that, you need to take classes for knowledge. And as I told you, we have got our live classes for the May-June 2025 session starting from the 1st of August. More details can be found on the website. Okay, question number 9. What would bring about a movement upwards along the supply curve for rice? So it's just a movement on the supply curve, okay? A decrease in the productivity of farm workers would essentially cause your supply to shift. It won't cause a movement because productivity falling means less of a supply, right? Available. A decrease in the profitability of rice, a decrease in the profitability of rice production. That would also discourage a lot of suppliers and cause the supply curve to shift towards left. An increase in consumers' income is gonna increase your demand. So you can see this here. Basically, this is your supply curve, and this is your demand curve. So when your demand increases and your demand curve shifts towards right, you see what happens? This is an extension of supply and a movement on the supply curve towards the upside. So we're going to go with option C over here. Now, question number 10. A government decides to reduce air pollution in city centers by giving financial assistance to bus companies, reducing their costs of production and prices for passengers. Which type of policy measure is this? Well, financial assistance is a subsidy, isn't it? So we're gonna go with option C here. Okay. What would be least likely to act as a sort of store of value during a period of rapid inflation? So it's least likely. Okay, please be careful with these type of questions, where you might choose the correct option, but you have to choose the option which is least likely, right? So they confuse you with that. Your gold, your shares, your property, they all will act as a store of value, right? Even cash can act as a store of value, but During period of inflation, as you know, that the price of goods and services are rising, and you need more money to buy things, right? And the money loses its value actually. So we can say that it's less likely to act as a store of value over the period of rapid inflation, or during a period of rapid inflation. Okay, so we're gonna go with option A over here. Okay, next, a country's central bank raised the interest from 1% to 4% per year. How would this change have affected the amount saved and the cost of borrowing by individuals? So basically, your interest rate is going up. And when that happens, the amount saved increases. And your cost of borrowing, does that increase? Well, of course. Your cost of borrowing has also increased. We're going to go with option D. So basically, when the interest rate goes up, there's more gain from saving because you get higher interest, right? And borrowing is expensive. So you will be discouraged to borrow. So a lot of people would have gone with option C over here because borrowing decreases, but the cost of borrowing has increased, which decreases the borrowing. Don't get confused. We're going to go with option D over here. Okay. 13th question. Which factor would not increase the bargaining strength of a trade union to raise wages? Now, this is very logical. If an economy is growing, well, trade union has a very strong argument for wage growth because economy is growing. They deserve to earn more in a growing economy. The workers deserve to earn more in a growing economy. A high union membership in the industry. Well, if the union membership is high, it means that trade union has more influence, more power. You know, during negotiations, they come from a very strong position because they can take actions that will be more impactful because of the high numbers. Okay. Legislation limiting strike action. Well, if that's the case, then this will not increase the bargaining strength because it's illegal for them to go on a strike action in case the negotiations fall apart. This is at least this one thing they cannot do. So this does not give them any strength, you know, in negotiations with the employers, with the management, right? Okay, this is the correct option. Workers are in short supply. Well, when workers are in short supply, then this obviously increases their bargaining power because the workers have, you could say, something to bargain, you know, that they're not in big numbers. If they wouldn't want to work, then it's not easy to replace them, right? So that gives them some edge in terms of their negotiations with the management for better pay and working conditions. Okay, which conditions are most likely to attract small firms to enter a market? Which conditions are most likely to attract small firms? Well, if the market is local and the fixed costs are low, when that's the case, you can say that small firms cannot be national, and they cannot afford high fixed costs. It's very obvious. We're gonna go with option B over here. Okay. Question number 15. The diagram shows a firm's total cost curve. So you can say this is fixed cost, by the way. This is fixed cost and this is total cost, right? Your variable cost can be parallel to total cost. You can go all the way up, right? But I'm not gonna draw this line. It kind of messes it up a little bit. All right. So let's read the question further. What is the average variable cost if the firm produces 10 units of output? So your average variable cost, basically the total cost is 50. The fixed cost is 10. The variable cost here is the difference between 50 and 10, which is 40, right? Now they're asking for average for 10 units. It's 40 for 10 units is the total, right? A total variable cost. Not total cost, but total variable cost. Just like the line that I drew earlier. This is your variable cost is equals to 40. Now, average variable cost is equals to 40 divided by 10, which is equals to 4. Okay. The diagram, the table shows the units of factors of production that a firm needs to employ for two different levels of output. The table shows the units of factors of production that a firm needs to employ two different levels of output. So when the output is 100 units, you see they're employing 5 units of land, 2 units of labor, 4 units of capital. When the output is 150, they're employing twice as much, 10 of land, 4 of labor, and 8 of capital. So basically your input has doubled. It has gone up. You see your inputs have gone up 2x and your output has gone up only 1.5x. So what does that mean? So it means that we've got we cannot say we've got constant returns to scale. We'd say we've got diseconomies of scale. Oh, because basically we have increased our input and our output has not risen as much, right? So you can say that we've got diseconomies of scale or decreasing returns to scale. You could also use that term, decreasing returns to scale. What is an example? What is an example of a government macroeconomic aim? A minimum 10 years of schooling, a sales tax. So this is a policy. This is not correct. A target. Well, this could be the government's macroeconomic aim. Increasing pay for nurses is not the ultimate objective. Okay, reducing unemployment, increasing the standard of living. It could be a macroeconomic aim. But let me just tell you the 4 key macroeconomic objectives: high GDP, low unemployment, low and stable rate of inflation, and balance of payments. Okay, this inflation here is one of the key macroeconomic aims. Right, the others are a minimum 10 years of schooling. Okay, but it's not essentially your macroeconomic aim, right? Uh, when, as I mentioned, if your GDP is high, if your unemployment rate is low, that's what we are what mainly what that's what mainly we are concerned about, right? uh so schooling is part of it. Like if our workforce is skilled, educated, then it will help us in reducing the unemployment rate. It will help us in fulfilling the jobs, and perhaps if there are other aspects such as increase in economic growth, then this will help us in creating jobs, right? So let's move on to the next question. Government policy measures can affect economic activity in a country. Which pair of monetary policy measures likely to increase employment? So what's monetary policy? Monetary policy essentially uses 3 tools: interest rates, money supply, and exchange rates. Income tax is not a monetary policy. Subsidies is not a monetary policy. Now the question is that which pair of monetary policy measures would be likely to increase employment? So which is more sort of an expansionary monetary policy? Increasing money supply and reduce interest rate. This is your answer. Decrease foreign exchange is correct. This first part is correct because this will increase the aggregate demand. But increasing education spending is not. It's not a monetary policy measure. It's either a supply side measure or it's a fiscal policy measure because it involves government expenditure. So A is also wrong. We're gonna go with option B. Okay. What would be most likely to encourage saving? So easy. Interest rates. We've discussed about this, I guess, in one of the previous questions. If interest rates are high, people tend to save more, borrow less, right? Because they can get a better return on their savings. The government of a country operating at full employment increases its spending on education and training. The government of a country operating at full employment increases its spending on education and training. How does this affect the likelihood of achieving low inflation in the short run and the long run? So the question is about low inflation. Okay, that's the policy objective. The government is operating at full employment and it's increasing its spending on education and training. So obviously in the long run, you can say that because of better trained workforce, we might be able to increase the supply, increase the agri supply, and bring down the inflation. So it's more likely in the long run, right? So option A is wrong, C is wrong. In the long run, it's very likely. So it can be either B or D. But is it possible in the short run? Well, if we are increasing our expenditure or our spending on education and training, then this means that there's an increase in aggregate demand due to government expenditure, and this causes inflation. So it's not very likely in the short run at least that your inflation would be low. In fact, it could potentially rise. So we're gonna go with option B over here. Okay, question number 21. A government has introduced a tax on a necessity. Producers have passed on a large proportion of this tax to consumers in the form of higher prices. Well, this is only possible when your demand is PED is inelastic. Because you see what happens is that because of tax, like this is your demand curve. Let me make it more sort of inelastic. It's more kind of steep, and that's when it's inelastic, right? So when there's an indirect tax, which is what the government does, right? And which is what, which is the case when producers are able to pass on these taxes to the consumers because these are taxes on goods and services. So they're spent indirectly at the time of the consumption of those goods and services. Direct taxes are your taxes on incomes, right? Indirect taxes which were collected by the consumers uh, on behalf of the government, right? By the producers from the consumers on behalf of the government. So this actually increases the prices. There's the goods are being sold to the consumers, and this causes your aggregate supply curve to shift towards left. So basically, these are your indirect taxes, right? And they're because they are on a necessity. You see, since it mentions it's a necessity, then it's going to be price inelastic. If it was not a necessity, then it might not have been it might not have been price inelastic. The PED might not have been price inelastic. So we go with option D over here. Okay, 22. What is most likely to lead to an increase in structural unemployment? You must know what's the structural unemployment. The country is experiencing a positive economic growth next. So when we're talking about economic growth, then that's not a structural employment, that's cyclical. Okay, the country is moving from producing primaries. This is the potential answer. The country is moving towards more flexible labor market. This will reduce actually frictional unemployment if the labor market is more flexible. So what's going to increase structural unemployment? Well, this is the answer. The country is moving from producing primary sector goods because there's a change in the structure of the economy, and this can lead to structural unemployment in the primary sector because we're moving away from the production of primary goods. So people employed within these industries can possibly become unemployed because of this transition within the economy, and that's your structural unemployment. Which citizens are most likely to benefit in a period of rapid inflation? Well, remember, those who have borrowed at a fixed interest rate, and if there's inflation, the amount of money that they've borrowed loses value by the time they have to return it back to the lenders, so they benefit. I hope you got it. We've got to move on. Question 24. Which statement is correct about the Human Development Index and real GDP? HDI includes, well, okay, you have to have that knowledge. HDI includes exports and imports while real GDP does not. That's not true. HDI includes three main elements. It includes life expectancy. It includes and years of schooling. Yes, it can include both of these. So there are three elements. Even real GDP is one of the components of your HDI. If I remember correctly, this index was developed by Mahbub al-Haq, a Pakistani economist, and today it's used in studies, economic studies, all around the world. It's become a standard to measure the development across all economies, and it includes three elements: life expectancy, years of schooling, and so basically level of education, level of healthcare. When we talk about life expectancy, we're talking about healthcare. When we talk about years of schooling, we're talking about education, and level of income, which is measured using real GDP. So real GDP simply includes the GDP per head adjusted for inflation. Obviously, it does not talk about life expectancy or years of schooling of or healthcare or education standards. So that's what we use for measuring the standard of living. We're gonna go with option B or here. Okay. Other things being equal, what will cause a population both to increase and to age? Interesting. A fall in the birth rate. So when the birth rate falls, population does not increase. A fall in the death rate. Well, that sounds so good, right? That when less people are dying, right? The population would increase, obviously, because people are still being born, but the ones that were about to expire, sorry to say that, would not. So it would cause your population to rise. At the same time, it will cause aging as well. So population is not just rising, but the population is also aging. It's causing the population to increase in age. Okay, which change would be unlikely to be found in a country as it develops? Which change would be unlikely to be found in a country? Okay, an increase in the average incomes. It says unlikely again. We have to find for the negative answer here. An increase in average incomes, of course, it's found there. So this is not correct. An increase in manufacturing, production, an increase in shipping services. I think this is also possible if the economy is developing. An increase in subsistence farming and a decrease in well, that's false. We're gonna go with this one because subsistence farming is a very traditional, and it's the case in very less developed economies where people, consume what they are growing, and they depend on farming. So usually, as countries are developing, there are less and less people in the primary sector, and uh, the secondary and the tertiary sector become more important. So where it says, decrease in financial services, that's also not likely because your tertiary sector grows as the economy develops. So financial services are going to rise. They're going to be rising these sort of services. We're going to go with option C. I'm not going to read option D. We've got to finish it quickly. It is, but I would recommend you to read all the options before you make your choice. Okay. It is cheaper for developed economies to buy some cereals from developing countries than to produce them domestically. What might reduce international trade in cereals? Okay, cereals become less popular with the production of with the population of developing economies. Okay, let me focus on this question. Let's read this again. It is cheaper for developed economies to buy some cereals from developing than to produce them domestically. And this is because the factors of production, certain factors of production, are cheaper in those countries. Right. The question is, what might reduce international trade in cereals? What will affect the international trade? Cereals become less popular with the popular with the population of developing economies. Let's keep this option in reserve. Let's move on to the next one. Developed economies place an embargo on cereal imports to prevent disease. If there's an embargo, it's a protectionist measure. It can reduce the international trade. So can we go with that one? I think we can. Let's read the other options as well because I want to be sure about it. Government tax cereal production in developed economies. Well, this will increase the international trade because if the government is not allowing you to produce it, you might have to buy it from outside. So this is not correct. So this will increase international trade. Producer sealers in developing economies are subsidized. Well, then this means they will start exporting because these will be cheaper, and they will start exporting to developed economies. So this will create international trade. The question is what might reduce international trade. Cereals become less popular with the population. Again, this is also wrong. Why? Because if they're not popular, nobody wants to buy them. There's no trading of them internationally as well. So it will reduce international trade. Uh, so this is an option that I could consider, uh, but it's not as convincing. I could go for a tick mark over here, but it's not as convincing as this one. So we have to choose the best one. That's why I was like a little bit dubious about which answer to go with. So we're gonna go with option B, and you guys can check from the mark scheme as well. Or if it's wrong, just let me know in the comments. All right, next one. A country imposes a quota on imported cars. What is the most likely outcome of this action? Now, when a country imposes a quota, it reduces the quantity of cars that can be imported. It will not decrease the production domestically, it will increase the production. So it's not likely because quota means there's a limit on the cars that can be imported into the country. And if there's a limit, then that means the domestic supply will increase. A decrease in the domestic price of cars, of course, it would rise because there are fewer cars coming now because of quota. So this is wrong. An increase in the tax revenue for no, it's a quota. If it was a tariff, then tax revenue could have been increased. An increase in the total revenue for domestic car producers? Well, yes, because they're not selling more cars because there are fewer cars coming from abroad, so their revenue is going to rise. An Argentine product initially sells in the US for $50 when the exchange rate between the two countries is 5 pesos to $1. An Argentine product initially sells. So basically, it's $1 is equals to 5 pesos, right? And it sells for $50. It's an Argentine product, so it's produced in pesos. In Argentina, they use pesos, right? So it sells in the US for $50, which means it sells for 250 pesos. Let me just read the full question. The exchange rate changes to 10 pesos to $1 and the price of the product remains unchanged in Argentina. So please focus. 10 pesos for $1. So basically the product was 250 pesos, right? Based on the original exchange rate. So that was the cost in Argentina, 250 pesos, because we're counting in pesos, we're exporting from Argentina. It's still the same price. It's just that now 250 pesos, because of this new exchange rate, are only going to get you 25 USD. Because it's 10 pesos to $1. So it's gonna 250 means divided, 250 with the new exchange rate means 250 divided by 10, which is going to be $25. What will be the new price of the product in the US? $25. All right. Next question. Question number 30. Which policy measure is most likely to reduce the current account deficit of the balance of payments of an economy? Which policy measure is most likely to measure? Which policy measure is most likely to reduce the current account deficit? When we talk about current account deficit, we're talking about trade in goods, trade in services, net income, and net transfers. So what will reduce it? Well, decreasing the level of subsidies to domestic producers. This is not good because that means that they are not as competitive and they cannot export. So this will not reduce the current account deficit. Current account deficit reducing means current account improving. So what improves? This does not improve the current account positions. This is wrong. Increase infrastructure spending to increase productivity. When productivity is high, average cost of production is low, and this reduces the prices. This makes the products more competitive internationally and increases the exports and reduces the deficit if there's one on the current account. So we're going to go with option B over here. Interest rate increasing is not good. because it increases the cost of production. Investment decreases with that, and cost of production rises, and exports would fall. And this is bad for current accounts. The deficit would rise. Removing import tariffs, again, it's not so good, because if import tariffs are removed, imports would rise and current account would be negatively impacted. So we're gonna go with option B here. If there's anything that's wrong, because I'm not 100% correct always, even as a teacher, we all can make some silly mistakes, but I'm sure everything's gonna be right. And I think we've covered everything for today. I'll try my best to come up with yet another past paper solution within this week for those who have exams in May session of 2024. I wish you all the best. Watch my other past paper solution videos as well. As you know, practice makes you perfect. All right. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.